So fixing all these receptacles is a pain because you have to start off by taking each receptacle one by one. Okay, you got to remove these top screws when you're using these type of metal plates, because the problem is this type of receptacle here will not fit into this plate because this top piece here will actually hit the top of that. Okay, so what you got to do, you got to grab yourself a drill. You got to take all these screws and stuff out. So you just hold it at the top, hold that little piece of plastic there on the top of these screws, and all you want to do is just back that out. So take that one out, and then your bottom one's already out of there. That one must already took out, or the screw just fell out. And you got two options here. Okay, option one is you can take your linesman pliers and you can just snap it off. Okay, or option two is you can bend it off. Most of these they'll just bend off like that, just breaks right off. Take the other side, bend it off, break it off. Then you got your receptacles that look like that versus receptacles that look like that with screws in it. So you can do these either way. You can bend them off like so and then take the screws out, or bend them out. But you want to do all this at once. Okay, get this all taken care of. Just sit down, take your time before you try to do the wiring, because you don't want to run back and forth, because you waste so much time doing that. So we're getting all these taken out. Now, when we wired this panel up here behind me, we took all the scrap wire and we wrapped it up and we saved it. So here's all that scrap wire. And what we did was we took it and we cut it into these little tiny pieces. So since I got 10 receptacles, I cut 10 strands of white wire, okay? I cut 10 strands of black wire, and since each receptacle box is going to have 2 receptacles, I cut 20 pieces of copper wire. Now these are all going to get stripped down, and I'm going to use these to connect the 2 receptacles together, okay? So this is why you want to save your scrap wire. Don't throw it away. And what a lot of guys will do, okay, and I'm going to tell you this now, what they'll do is they'll go through and they'll wire all the receptacles and stuff up, and they'll take brand new wire and then they'll use that to cut it. Just wait until you have scrap wire, okay? So that's why we got the panel wired up first before we wired all the receptacles, so we can use the scrap wire. We're going to go ahead and get all these put together and stuff, and I'll have to get all this cut and all this stuff put together, and then I can just go from box to box down the wall and wire it up pretty fast, because I'll have all the parts and stuff I need, okay? So we're trying to create the material and make all the parts and all that kind of stuff right now that we're going to actually need for this. Now, if you don't do that, you're going to have to stop every time, cut the wire and all that stuff, and then it's just blah back and forth. Now, as far as these here ground faults go, these have to be bolted in. So I've bolted every single one of these in, and I've fixed all these. So as you can see, we got 10 receptacles that's ground fault here already bolted in. And the reason I'm not putting these in first is because I won't be able to get to the screws to tighten the wires down. So I'll have to put these in, wire them up, then I'll have to take these, wire them up. But I'll go ahead and attach all these, white and black screws to these single receptacles here and stuff. And then that way, once I get the wires that's in the wall wired into these receptacles, then I'll just go ahead and then attach these receptacles here to these, and then I'll have that all taken care of. All right, guys, so I've been sitting in the chair there, and I'm taking all the scrap wire that's left over from the panel, and what I'm doing is I'm basically using it, which is laying right there, to actually make all these little, pieces and parts and stuff like that. So I've cut 10 of these, 10 whites, 10 blacks, and then 20 of the copper for all of my receptacle. Now these are the ground fault receptacles here, and I'm putting them inside of here because they have to be bolted into these metal plates, which really suck. So I'm installing all these first, and then I'm going to take all these wires here, strip them down, get them to size, and put them in all these receptacles. These receptacles look like this right here. They got screws, so you got to take those screws out first. Then you got to take the tops here and you break them off so they'll turn out and basically look like that. See how the tops are broke off right there? You got to break all these off and do that. And you got to do the same with your ground fault receptacles here. And then what I'll do is I'll wire them up. Now when I'm wiring these, as I've pointed out before, I'm putting the hot wires right there inside the middle. So when you have these both hot wires on here, what will happen is, see, the hots will both be right there in the middle for both of those, okay? So when I turn this around, what it's going to look like is one receptacle will be right side up and the other will be upside down. This receptacle over here, I just wired it up. This is kind of a pain. This looks god-awful, but that's one's been wired up there already, and you can see down inside there. That just, I don't think you get any more awful than that. I'm pretty sure an electrician will say, dude, what the hell, man, that looks awful. Well, yeah, that's me for you. But it'll work. That's the main thing. And the inspector, if he doesn't like it, he'll tell me to rip it out and redo it. So we're getting all these here fixed. All the receptacles, we're stripping them down, we're wiring them up, getting everything here all laid out. And then what I'll do is I'll just start going down the wall there wiring everything up. We got our big 240 plugs already wired up. I wired those up last night. I got this one in here. Also, as you guys can see, I took the bolts completely out of these, made a hook shape with the wire, and then I put the wire underneath the bolt and everything and then tightened it down. So those aren't just pushed in there straight, those are actually hooked around and stuff, and I'll show you guys that later. But remember, make sure you put your black electrical tape on that neutral wire, because that neutral wire is serving as a hot, so you want to make sure you mark those, okay, because I'll get you a failed inspection. So everything's coming along. I got my tool belt here. I got all my tools over here, screwdriver. Got myself my wire pliers, everything. So we're just going to keep at it here until we get this all finished up. Using my drill, got my lineman pliers, everything, and we've just been working at this for probably about half an hour or so now. And remember, when you're cutting these wires here, you can cut more than one wire at a time. Don't just say one wire, one wire. No, put like 3 or 4 of them in your linesman pliers and snip them at once. Makes things go a hell of a lot faster. But anyways, let's go ahead and get back to it so we can start wiring up all these receptacles. I think there's 10 of them all together. As you can see, I've been working on these receptacles. Every one of these has a ground wire attached to it. Those are my ground faults. And then over here, we took all those little pigtails I showed you earlier. And this is what we have right here. We have a receptacle, a neutral wire on one side, a ground wire, and then we have our hot on our opposite side. So they're all stripped down. The strips on this end are different than this end because of the ground fault receptacles, because of these ground fault receptacles. So you have to use these wire strip gauges that are right there on the back. So those are all stripped to proper size. I also went ahead and stripped all the wires in the walls. So these are all stripped down too, as you guys can tell. So as of now, I'm ready to go. I could go ahead and put these receptacles in. My concern right now is really that the wires might be a little too long. We'll just have to wait and see how that works out. But ultimately, got everything taken care of.
All right, guys, so I'm going to show you here real fast on how to actually wire up our receptacles here. So there's 3 wires in your box. You got your black, which is your hot, your white, which is your neutral, and then your green or your bare copper wire, which is your ground. So right now we just inserted the black wire into our ground fault receptacle, and we're actually tightening that screw down. And then we're going to take the white neutral wire and put it on the opposite side and insert that and tighten that down as well. Now, when you're tightening these wires down, make sure you're pressing the wires into the receptacles as you're tightening them down. And with ground fault receptacles, be sure to read the instructions to make sure that you're putting the wires into the proper screw holes and stuff like that. Now, there's 2 ways to wire up a ground fault receptacle. One is you can basically wire it up so that every receptacle down the line does not have ground fault protection, or you can wire it up so it does have ground fault protection. So the way we're wiring this up is the second receptacle here, the one that I'm installing right now, is going to have ground fault protection. So we're putting it in the second screw hole further down, and then we're going to tighten that down, and that'll give this receptacle ground fault protection as well. Now, if I would have put it in the top of the receptacle where I put the first wire, then this receptacle would not have the ground fault protection. So right now I'm double checking all my screws, making sure everything's good and tight, and I'm inserting my receptacle into the cover, and I'm going to tighten it down with the screw gun. Now, I'm installing one of these receptacles upside down, and the reason I'm doing that is so that both of the hot wires are located inside of the center of basically the box. Because what can happen is, let's say if one of those hot wires become loose and work its way out of the receptacle, it can touch the metal box, and it can actually electrocute you when you come in contact with that box. So I decided I'm just going to put the hot wires in the dead center of the box, and that way when I tuck the wires and everything into the wall, I'm less likely to bump something. As you can see, I just took the second receptacle's neutral wire, pressed it into the ground fault receptacle, and I just tightened that down as well. And now I'm double checking my work. So now what we got to do is we got to figure out how we're going to position our wires and stuff in here so nothing touches anything that it shouldn't. So I'm bending my wires down, and I'm trying to get everything nice and neat here. And definitely trying to figure out how to put wires in a receptacle or inside of a box in the wall. It's definitely a challenge because you never want like your bare ground copper wires to actually touch the hot or the neutral. And a lot of times that'll happen and stuff by accident. So you got to be careful there on how you actually position everything and stuff. And you also do not want to overbend the wires. If you bend them too sharply, you can actually damage the wires and not allow the current of electricity to flow properly. So make sure you don't overbend your wires and put like too sharp of bends and stuff like that in them. So right now I'm taking my linesman pliers, I'm twisting all of my copper wires and stuff together, and we're trying to get them all twisted up nice and tight there and stuff, and then we're just going to keep twisting and wrapping them and stuff. Then what I'll do here is I'm going to take the linesman pliers. And right now you can see I'm trying to squeeze them so everything's good and straight. But in the end, what we're going to do is we're just going to cut off the tips right there like I just did. And then we're going to take a wire nut and put onto there. Now there's different size wire nuts and stuff, and the wire nuts vary based on the gauge of wire and how many wires is in there. I can either use a green wiring nut, which is a grounding wire nut, or I can use a red wire nut here, but there's 4 wires there, so I have to use red wire nuts. If I would use a yellow wire nut, I don't think that would be allowed, because the yellow wire nuts only allow for like 3 wires and stuff, and that's a thing. So right now I'm pushing the receptacle and all the wires and everything back into the wall. I'm testing it, make sure everything's going to go in there nice and snug. Now I'm taking the screws out of the box, and I'm going to go ahead and basically reattach the electrical cover, and more or less we'll actually be done here. This will be fully wired up, and now we have to do all the other receptacle boxes the exact same way. All right, guys, so I got all my receptacles and everything installed. I left a couple of them open across the bottom and whatnot for the inspector to see, and I gave him a call, and he actually came right out, and he inspected everything, and we had 1 violation, well, technically 2, and I'll show you what the violation is right here. I'm going to have to correct these light bulbs that I put in up here, these light fixtures for our switch, are not allowed. They can become broken and damaged. Doing that is only allowed inside of an attic or crawl space. So that's not allowed. That's a safety violation on both of those. So I'm going to have to run to Lowe's. I'm going to have to go ahead and get some replacement light fixtures. I'm going to have to put something up that's got some kind of like glass globe or some kind of like frame or something like that that protects the bulb, because that's just not going to protect the bulb there. Those are safety violations. So I have to replace that. But other than that, everything passed. He liked the receptacles. He said everything looked good. Panel looked good. He said it looks better than some of the panels that he's used to inspecting. So I mean, I could probably believe that. But other than that, yeah, we passed our inspection. Other than that one safety violation stuff, but he went ahead and passed me. But I'm going to have to go, and I'm going to have to swap those 2 light fixtures out. So off the Lowe's we go. Let's go ahead and correct our safety violation so we can get our mining shed up and running.